Welcome back, everyone. So as you see, I've erased all the pencil lines. Alternatively, you might want to trace over your original drawing before you begin the inking phase. So you leave the pencil line paper underneath, put a new one over, and then start inking. But usually when your eraser is good enough and you haven't put in too thick of a line with your pencil, erasing is fine. All right, we were about to go into the finer details. So I'm using this 01 and this 005, which are 0.25 millimeters and 0.20. The difference isn't a lot, but you can see it a bit, and it also just feels differently. So firstly, I want to finish the chest. Now I draw chests almost always in the same way. Thick iron bands, and then the wood lines, the planks that it consists of. So I am making some tiny mistakes, which is because the camera is in the way, but it doesn't really matter. So I use these to draw the individual planks, and then later I can use the other one to add some wood grain to them. And if you do that with the same one, it doesn't come out as well. This step is also really nice and important. I create the waves for the water. It's important to go around the rocks that are in there and the edges, like so. And leave some gaps in between. You don't want this to be a continuous line. And also on the other side. Right? And we have to draw the source of the water, which is a bit of a waterfall usually for me. So I just draw some lines going out there, and usually I add some, what is it exactly? Bubbles, foam, something like that. Usually works quite well. And we go over to the bed, which still need pillows. I mean, I don't even know if kobolds actually use pillows, but why wouldn't they? It also makes the bed recognizable as a bed, which is important. And we add the sticks with logs, like so. Some coals here and there. Yeah. Right. That's already quite a few details done. I like to add some very small rocks here and there. Okay, this detailing is probably going to be sped up quite a lot because I don't have a lot to say, I notice. It's just adding tiny specks of interest here and there. Just to some noise, basically. So I'm going to show you the wood grain effect, which is quite similar to the water, actually, funnily enough. Oh, you can see it like that. Let me zoom in a bit. So we're zoomed in a tiny bit. Let's see if you can see this. So I add those lines quite wavily, like the water. sometimes cut it out. Interestingly, you could add holes like this, which are the knots of older logs. And that especially sells the wood grain effect, I think. For this one, these are barrels, so you have the planks on the side like that, and I usually add a stopper or something similar like that. Also to the chest, which is also made of wood, like that. That's that detail done. And we can add some more detailing here, like next to it, maybe even. This is something I haven't tried before, but might work. And another one. It's supposed to be a chicken leg or turkey leg or something like that. Some chewed out bone next to it. Yeah, turned out alright. Add some more wrinkles to this bed, like so. For these details, sometimes dirtier or messier is better. It's also so finely detailed that doesn't really, if it doesn't, if it isn't as neat as you want it, that's okay. It's very tiny. People will hardly notice. I think I'm going to make this a bit darker like that. All right. Now, the water can also use another line, but this one has to be even more broken up and thinner, which is why I'm using the next size of the fine liner. This isn't always necessary. Sometimes it looks good. Sometimes, especially when it's a bit of a thinner stream of water, it's best to leave it with one. Pass over. But this is good, I think. Works for this one. Add a bit of... I don't really know what it is. Swirls? Maybe a bubble? I don't really know. I know it looks good. It adds variety and noise. Again, some rocks, or maybe they're bubbles. Doesn't really matter. It's whatever the beholder makes of it. Noises in the eyes of the beholder. Anywho, next step is adding tiling. So, a grid. And the tiling also adds a lot of details. So we're gonna go over that step now. So my way of tiling is a bit weird, because you can use a ruler again, but that makes I think that's useless because you could add an overlay grid in Photoshop if you want, and if you're going to use this in a VTT, then it already has an overlay grid. So this grid is if you want to print it out, but it also adds detail and warmth to your drawing, which is why I'm doing them loosely, not with a ruler. And again, mistakes are fine as long as they are 5 feet squares and don't what's the word for that? Don't stray too far from a 5 by 5 feet square. So as you can see, I'm not drawing straight lines yet. I'm not connecting them all because the dots are so tiny and so light that if I were to draw a line straight through, when I come over to the horizontal lines, I can't find the dots anymore. And my tiling doesn't make any sense. And I have to use a ruler, which I don't want. So, and if I were to connect this one, I can try. You see, I'm still leaving a bit of space. That's also a way to do that. But I've found that it ends up being a little bit too messy if I do that consistently. Now, interestingly, I sometimes leave a bit of space between this and the line below. I have found that comes out really beautiful sometimes, but again, it's not a necessity. Oh God, I can't find the dots. Where's the dots? Like that. Oh boy, sometimes it's hard to see. This is my least favorite step of drawing a map. And there are definitely better ways to do it, but this is mine. So when I come over to the horizontal dots, I turn the page because my strokes downwards are a lot tidier, neater than my strokes sideways. And as I'm going around these details, I try not to go straight through them, and maybe even stop a fraction of a millimeter before I touch them. Also helps in creating a more easily perceptible detail objects. Oh, I did not mention that, but I only draw these grids on the floors. And technically, you could draw them over the rocks they can stand on as well. But I think that's unnecessary. It's usually from context. Players can see how big a step it would be to go over that rock. And if a rock is bigger than 2 or 3 tiles, it's usually a pillar and not a climbable rock. If it were to be a really big rock, then I might tile on top of the rock as well. I also don't tile through the water, even though you can move through that as well. Once again, this water isn't huge, so from details from context you can see here's a tile, here's a tile, so there has to be one tile in between. It's not that difficult to read that, and if a player really needs to calculate how far it can move through the water, then a DM might grab a ruler or use an overlay grid in case of a VTT. I personally, as a DM, don't really mind. So, which is why I don't grid it, because it doesn't look too good if everything is gridded. It gets really noisy. And a bit of noise is good, but too much noise isn't. So I think we've got all the horizontal ones. Now we need to finish by connecting all the lines that are still not connected. Like so. I also don't grid the stairs. Sometimes I do, sometimes I don't. But I don't think it's necessary in this case, and it will make things too noisy, too messy. But I will take another look in a moment once I've tiled everything else. Maybe it's okay to tile them too. Like so, there we go. That one. think we got everything. Yeah, we do. So the stairs here, I'm gonna tall these a bit because they're quite big. Doesn't look too bad. This one a little maybe. Yeah. This one as well. Yeah, that's fine. Right. Now, final pass over is adding a bit more noise and details and cracks and stuff like that to the tiles. And then we're done with the inner workings basically. I'm still going to detail the walls and add color and shading. So this step is completely random. I'm just going to add cracks or, marks wherever I like it. I'm still not completely satisfied with the way I do this in my maps. I think it's necessary to add some roughness like this, but I would prefer to do something differently, but haven't found what I'm looking for yet. And cracks in this case make sense because it's in a cavern. It's all made of stone cracks. Oh yeah, it's quite cool to add some cracks to the staircase. I feel like staircase is walked on quite a lot, so that leaves it damaged quite easily. So it makes sense for it to be cracked. There's some dust lying around it, rock dust. See, it's now really important that this line weight difference here, if you hadn't used a small line weight for these details, it might easily be construed as something important for the players to look at, like something that's actually there to influence the player's movement, for example. And it isn't. It's just there for the looks. Right, I'm going to add some a bit of pointillism, a bit of dotting there to add shade. You could add cobwebs if you would like that. I'm not going to do that on this map, but that's also something that's a nice detail. I think we're done. This place is pretty open, so add a bit more rocky area. Yeah, that's the detailing done. Finally, we go over to shading and rock the walls. For the walls, I use 0.8, which is 0.5. Please focus on the pen. Yes, there we go. And this is my way of drawing the rock walls. I find outcroppings in my walls already, so like this is an edge, and then I make rocks inside of them like that. Not in this one because that's not a floor to ceiling pillar. Same with the outside wall. So this is going to take a long time. I'm going to skip it or speed it up. So now I've added a lot of rocks everywhere, but as you can see in some of the inside pillars, I've already done that, is adding some what's it like, floating rocks. They're not floating, because you have to see this like the rock wall, which just exists of very big rocks in my mind, almost like they're cemented together, which of course isn't how it works, but it looks good. And these floating rocks are just a little deeper into the wall, I suppose, and they help ease over from the hard edge here to nothingness. It's not important for the players. So I'm adding a few big ones using the same thickness of pen, and then after I'm done with that, I'm going over to a smaller thickness, adding a few more details into the rocks, into the walls, by adding smaller rocks, floating rocks that go between the others. Yeah, pretty much done. Alright, let's go over to the smaller. In this case, I'm using a 0.3, which is 0.35 millimeters. And finally, a few that are a little further away at random spots. A few clusters. Don't really know why that works, but it works. Really seals the deal for me. Creates an overall nicer aesthetic image to look at. Now, I've done this pretty damn quickly. A lot quicker than I do it usually. It looks okay. So, next time we're going to shade it and color it, but this is already usable. I suggest scanning it in at this point, because this line art is already pretty nice to look at and quite usable as a map. But we're going to add some shading next time to make it even more clear that this is a raised level, for instance, and this is a raised level. Yeah, see you then. Subscribe if you want to be notified for the next upload. Thanks.